Well, good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending upon the part of the world that you're in. My name is Kurt Diekman. I am the Director of Program Management for Hock International, and it is my privilege and honor to welcome you to this CMA exam strategic tips on studying, featuring Brian Hock. Just a couple quick things before we get started and our last few folks join in. Wanted to let you know that there is a chat section in the lower part. If you have a question, feel free to put it in there and we will either address them during the session, or if there's something the group needs to talk about at the end, we'll bring those up at the end. You see before you now the agenda for this. We're going to talk about a little bit about individual preparation for the exam. To start off, Brian will go into depth about the MCQs and the essays and how to prepare for both of those, and then working your way through the mock exam and how to prepare yourself over the last few weeks before you come up on your exam date. So a short agenda, but one that's very important. You can see here, obviously, you are all familiar with Brian. If you aren't, you might be in the wrong webinar. So Brian is an outstanding speaker, well-educated, very professional, and you will enjoy listening to him today. If you'd like to connect with him on LinkedIn, the QR code there at the bottom will allow you to do that. Feel free to take a screenshot or use your mobile phone to go into that and connect with him. But you didn't come here to hear me speak. You came here to speak with Brian and listen to what he has to say. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Brian and let him begin our session. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Kurt, and thank you everyone for giving us a little bit of your time, either this evening, this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where it is that you are located. What we're going to do today is talk about how you can prepare and do a little bit better on your actual CMA exam. I know that we have a window just started a few days ago in January. I actually know a couple of people who took the exam and felt very comfortable and confident about their results when they came out of the exam room. And so we're at the start of this exam window, and a lot of you are going to be taking your exam over the next 2 months. And so with that, not only is there a lot of excitement about taking your exam, but also there's excitement or anxiety about taking your exam as well, in terms of just kind of making certain that you're ready and you don't necessarily know what to expect, what's going to happen. Of course, every exam is a little bit different. And so just because you talked to somebody who took the exam, yesterday and they felt very comfortable and confident, that doesn't mean your exam is going to cover exactly the same things that their exam covered. And so anxiety. And that's what we're talking about today, is trying to reduce that anxiety a little bit by helping you feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more prepared for how you're going to approach those MCQs and essays. And the good news is those are the two types of questions on the exam. There are MCQs and there are essays. And so if you're prepared for the MCQs and you're prepared for the essays, you are prepared for everything that you're going to face on the exam. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get to all of that, the specifics of the MCQs and the essays, I want to talk just a little bit about the actual preparation for the exam and the process that you're going to be going through. And hopefully, if you're taking the exam in January or February, you've already done quite a bit of this. Okay, you should be mostly done at this point if you're taking the exam in this window. But we need to keep in mind that it is proper preparation that's the foundation of your success on the exam. You can't do this in the last 2 weeks before you take your exam. I know sometimes people would say, oh, well, I'm going to take a month's holiday. I'm going to take 2 weeks holiday before the exam, and I'm going to study full time. That's unlikely to work. Okay, this is something that takes time. There's a process to all of this. There's a lot of content that needs to be learned in both parts of the exam. And so we want to make certain that you've been studying well all along. If you're studying with Hock as a self-study student, we have the PassMap that does that. If you're studying with one of the many partners we work with, their classes and their guidance are doing that. But you just need to keep in mind that this is a long-term process. This is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter sprint. We're actually doing the full marathon in our preparation. And so we need to make certain that we have that proper foundation in our content. And part of what this means is we need to understand the topics, not just the correct answer. And what I mean by that is, as you're practicing MCQs and as you're studying, you may go through a question and you may say, oh, I know how to calculate that. Well, that's good. And that's the first step. But really what we need to make certain you do is you understand why that calculation is the way it is. And when you understand why, when you have that foundational knowledge of that topic itself, not only are you going to get the correct answer, but what it is you've prepared yourself for that question on the exam that's just a little bit different. You've prepared yourself for that question on the exam that asks it from a slightly different perspective than you've practiced it, or words it in a different way, or the question is just structured differently, or it shows up on an essay. And not only is it you need to calculate the correct answer, but you need to understand what that number means. And so I want you to focus on the topics, not just the calculation or the formula that gives you the correct answer. We need to make certain that we understand those topics. And looking ahead, okay, till after you've passed and you're certified and in your career, it's actually knowing those topics that's going to allow you to add value at your job. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. That's what CMA is doing for you, is it's helping you do your job better, so you're going to get promoted. And that starts by understanding what it is that is actually on the exam. Something else to keep in mind as you're going through the study process, when people start, it takes a long time to do a question. And we get people write us and they're frustrated after the first month or so, and they say, oh my goodness, it takes me 4 minutes to do a question. And on the actual exam, I don't have 4 minutes to do this. Well, if you're taking the exam this window, hopefully you've already gone through a lot of this learning curve that happens, but there is a learning curve when you're doing the questions. You will learn how to read the question. You will learn how to pull out the information out of that question that's the relevant information more quickly. Hey, if you've heard me in a presentation, you may have heard me tell the story, but many years ago, I took the GMAT exam. Preparing to go to graduate school, so I took the GMAT exam, and so I went and bought a GMAT preparation book, and it came with a floppy disk. This is how long ago it was. So I go home and I put the floppy disk in, I install the program, and I start doing my practice questions, and I don't know, 50 or 60 questions, whatever it was. I actually did worse than statistical guessing on that practice exam. Okay, if I just done A, I would have done better than what I did. That's how badly I did. But I read the book. I understood a little bit more about how they ask the questions. I understood their double negative questions or whatever it is they were using at the time. And I ended up doing very well on the exam. But the point of this story is that there is a learning curve. You need to get experience with how they ask the questions, what type of questions they're asking. You'll learn to recognize that some of the information that's in the question isn't needed. It's not relevant. That's not part of the correct answer to the question. And so you will gain experience. And with that experience, it will take you less time. You'll be a little quicker in doing it. And you'll also do better because you will recognize some of those little tricks there are in the question. And we'll talk about some of these here in a little bit. But it doesn't all start right away. Okay, so the first time you sat down to study, you did a lot worse than you do right now. And so you still have that. Okay, if you're taking the exam in this window, you still have some time. You're going to go through more of that. You're going to start doing more questions. If you're here and you're taking the exam in a future window, be prepared for that. That there is going to be a learning curve. You are going to do better the more practice you get for all of this. So having said that is just kind of a general discussion about what's happening in the study process as a whole. Let's talk about the MCQs. Okay, we need to talk about the MCQs, and I'll give you some tips for this, but I think the most important thing to remember, the biggest tip, and we'll talk about this in a little bit of detail, the biggest tip and the most important thing to remember is that all of the MCQs are equal. So if you've studied, you know that there are some questions that are shorter and easier than other questions. Okay? Some of the questions might be assets equals liabilities plus. Okay? You need to know it's equity. And other questions, you have to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. You need to do overhead allocation, and you've got activity-based costing. So there's 3 different allocations you have to make. You have to make a calculation about variable and absorption costing. And those questions are long. Those questions take a little while to do, even if you know exactly what you need to do. It takes a while to read the information. It takes a little bit of time to get that information that you need. It takes a little bit of time to do the calculation. And so there are some questions that you cannot do in the average amount of time. The average time is 1.8 minutes per question. But there are some questions that it will take you 4 or 5 minutes to do, even if you know exactly how to solve the question. But that question, that is assets equals liabilities plus, and it takes you 10 seconds to do that question. If you get that question correct, it's +1. If you do the question that asks the difference in income between variable and absorption costing or something along those lines, and it takes you 5 minutes to do that question, and you get that question correct, it's +1. And so what this means is that you need to make certain that you answer all of the simple, easy questions that you know. You want to make certain that for every question on that 100 MCQs that are on your exam, every question that you know the answer to, you answer it correctly. And so the thing that we're worried about here is that questions 98, 99, and 100 are all short, simple, easy questions that you know. And it will take you 1 minute to do all 3 of those last questions. But if you spend 10 minutes on question number 11 and 12 minutes on question number 37 and 9 minutes on question number 82, you get to question number 95 and you have 1 minute left in your time. And so you say A for the last questions. And you didn't get the opportunity to get those last 3 questions that you know so well correct. So here's what you do. You keep in mind that you need to get all of those easy questions correct. So when you're going through the exam and you get to question number 11, and question number 11 asks you to calculate diluted earnings per share, I don't know, weighted average cost of capital, just one of those questions that takes a while to calculate. You get that question, you see that there's a whole screen worth of information, and you think to yourself, oh, I never really liked diluted earnings per share. Just always had trouble with those questions. Okay, please do not spend 10 minutes trying to answer this diluted earnings per share question right now. What you need to do is answer it. Pick a letter, A, B, C, or D, preferably. Those are your choices. Answer the question and then mark the question and move on to the next one. When you get to the end of your exam, if you have time left over, you can go back and spend that remaining time trying to calculate diluted earnings per share or weighted average cost of capital or whatever it is that you marked. But you need to make certain that you answer all of the questions you know, even if those are the last 3 questions on the exam. Spending all of that time calculated diluted earnings per share and getting that question correct is +1. That's it. The same value to you as all of those simple, shorter, easier questions. Okay, so that's my biggest takeaway in respect to the MCQs is do not spend a lot of time on one MCQ your first time through. If you get to the end and you have time left, yes, then you can do your calculate. You can go through diluted earnings per share, whatever it is. But make certain you answer all of those short, easy questions that you absolutely know the answer to. Okay, so another tip for the MCQs is what I call just be aware of extreme words. And by extreme words, I mean always, never, none, every, where we're going to kind of an extreme end of the spectrum. Now, it is possible that there is something that is never the case. And it is possible that there's something that is always the case. But if that's one of the words is the question, or that's one of the answer choices, you need to take a moment and think to yourself, is there a reason that always is true here or never is the case here? Maybe there is. And I'll give you an example that comes off the top of my head. When we have internally generated goodwill, we don't recognize it on our books because it doesn't meet the definition of an asset because it didn't come from a transaction. It didn't arise from an outside transaction. So if you get a question about internally generated goodwill, that answer is 0 because we don't recognize internally generated goodwill. And this leads to kind of a corollary to this rule, which is the rule of 0. If 0 is a choice, you need to ask yourself, is there a reason that 0 is automatically correct or automatically incorrect? And this example that I gave about internally generated goodwill, 0 is the correct answer. Okay, we don't recognize internally generated goodwill on our balance sheet. And so if there's a question about internally generated goodwill and they give you all the numbers that the company spent, that they invested, whatever, you don't need to do the math because you see 0 and you think, oh, yes, internally generated goodwill. We don't recognize it. The answer is automatically 0. So this is something that you will recognize and learn more as you go through the study process. If you think back to when you started studying, I know because everybody does this. There's a question and you answer the question, you do the question, you say B. B is correct. Absolutely, B is correct. And so you type B, you say C, and it's wrong. And then you read the question and you realize, oh, it asked which of the following is not true. Which of the following is not included? Not is a very important word when it shows up in a question. Okay, which of the following is and which of the following is not are two very different questions. And so look for that word not. You learn this as you go through. Okay, as you go through the study process, you will begin to recognize, this is what I said earlier, how a question is asked. And you will begin to recognize words like not, always, never in that question. And like I said, the difference between which of the following is and which of the following is not, those are different correct answers. And if you fail to recognize that not, making it kind of a negative question, one of that incorrect answer is going to be a choice. Okay, so practice will help with that. And also, this may sound kind of counterintuitive to the process, but as you're going through these MCQs, you also have to be patient. You need to kind of step back and make certain that you read the question that they've asked. Not the question you wanted them to ask, or not the question that you thought they were going to ask, but actually read the question to see what it is that they are actually asking you. Another small example, they ask you about depreciation. What's the depreciation expense? It's possible that they ask you, what is the depreciation expense in year 2? The depreciation expense in year 2 is different than the depreciation expense in year 1. Okay, there's different numbers unless it's straight line, and they won't ask you about straight line year 2. So you need to just be patient enough and attentive enough to actually read what it is that they are asking you. Again, not what you want them to ask you, not what you hope they ask you, not what you think they're going to ask you, but what that question is actually asking you. Now, something else as you're going through this process and studying, I know that there are going to be questions that you just don't like. And you're going to read the question and you're going to say, oh, I never liked that topic. I never understood that topic. I was hoping there wouldn't be any questions on the exam, but there are. Okay, there will be a handful of questions that you read the question and you just think, I don't know. I remember this, but I don't remember it fully. Okay, what I'm saying here with the slide is that if you're able to look at the 4 choices and eliminate two of them or even one of them, your chances go up. If you have all four choices and you just need to guess, you read the question and you think, I don't know, B, because you're mad at Brian right that moment because I didn't teach you that topic well enough. I don't know. You guess out of four choices, you have a 25% chance of getting that correct. But again, be patient. Look at the four choices. Maybe one or two of those choices are just wrong. You read it and you just think that can't be right. It says never, it says always, or you can say, well, that's probably not right. If you can eliminate two of those four choices as from your guessing, your 25% becomes 50%. So don't just guess immediately if you don't understand the question. Spend 15 seconds. Read the choices. Even if you can eliminate one, your chance of guessing successfully goes up. But if you can eliminate two, you're at 50%. Okay, so don't guess quickly. Spend a few seconds and see if you can make a more educated guess, having eliminated one or two of the four choices. So this is the MCQs. You're going to have 100 of them. You need to get 50% of them correct in order to go to the essays. If you don't get 50% correct, you don't have an opportunity to do the essays. And I'll tell you, I'll answer a question somebody might ask. And I say, but if I give 49% on the essays, or I'm sorry, on the MCQs, and I get 100% on the essays, won't my average be enough to pass? Okay. Mathematically, maybe. But here's the thing. If you got less than 50% of the MCQs correct, okay, when the answer is right there, you just need to identify the answer. You got less than 50% of the MCQs correct. Why do you think, what gives you hope that you're going to get 100% on the essays? You're not going to. If you get less than 50% on the MCQs, you're not going to get 100% on the essays. I don't have statistics for this, and I don't know if there are statistics, but my expectation is that whatever percentage you get of the MCQs correct, you probably get within 10 percentage points of the essays correct. If you get 75% of the MCQs correct, your essay score is probably between 65 and 85. So if you get 60% of the MCQs correct, you're probably not going to pass. Because statistically or mathematically, you would have to get 100% of the essays correct based on the weight of the exam. But if you only got 60% of the MCQs correct, why do you think you're going to get 100% of the essay correct? So you should not go into this with the strategy that I'm just going to do really, really well on the essays. Because most likely, your essay score is going to be pretty similar to your MCQ score. There's really no great reason for those to be different. So having connected there the MCQs and going into the essays, let's talk about the essays. Okay, let's talk about what it is that we're going to do with the essays. And the first question that people ask a lot, and we get this, is what topics will be included on the essays? What topics should I study for the essays? Well, here's the thing. Everything that's in the syllabus might be part of an essay question. Now, you're not going to have essay questions that cover the entire syllabus. You're going to have two essays that have multiple parts. And so you might cover 8 topics out of the syllabus as part of your essays. But those 8 topics could be any of the 8 topics that are there. And so you can't really focus on a specific topic to study for the essays and to prepare for the essays. But the thing is, you don't need to. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. I want to talk briefly, and then I'll come back to the larger point about the essays. Does spelling and grammar matter for your essays? Part of your essay is written. You have to type something up. Okay, a common structure for the essay question or the problem is you make some sort of calculation and then you explain what that number means. You explain why we made that calculation. What does the company do now? What's the next step? And so you're going to be typing sentences, probably not paragraphs, maybe a paragraph, bullet point lists. Does spelling and grammar matter? And the answer to that is yes, but no. Okay, it does matter as long as the person is able to understand what you were trying to say. Okay, as long as they understand what it is that you are trying to say. So if you misspell accumulated depreciation, that's okay. If you use the wrong spelling of the past verb tense of a word, that's okay. Now, if instead of accumulated depreciation, you wrote loss on disposal, okay, that's wrong. Those are different things. That's not a spelling mistake. But if your spelling mistake or your grammar mistake does not impact the information that was being communicated, and the person who's reading your essay is able to understand what it is you were trying to say, you'll get points for that. Okay, you'll get points for that. Let's talk about how the essays are graded. Okay, how are the essays graded? And this is important for you as you go through preparing and answering the essays. You start with 0 points. And when the person, and it is a person, multiple people will grade your essays, they will give you points for everything that you do correctly. You start with 0, and everything you do correct, +1, +2, +1, +2, whatever value each of those steps in the process is given. If you leave the essay blank, you get 0 points. Simple. Don't leave it blank. Write something. Try to give them an opportunity to give you a point or two, even if you don't understand the larger process or the larger question or all of it. If you get some of it correct, if you write something that's relevant, you will get a point or two for that. And you don't want to miss those points. You want to get all of the points you can. Now, let's pretend there's a series of steps. And the example I'll use, it's not the best example because you won't have this essay on the exam, but it's easy to illustrate the point with. Let's pretend that your essay is to prepare a short balance sheet. Okay, small company, you have to prepare the balance sheet. Okay, we know that assets are supposed to equal liabilities plus equity. So you do your essay, you make your, cash, inventory, fixed assets, your shares, your payables, and it doesn't balance. Okay, your balance sheet doesn't balance. So we know that your balance sheet is wrong. Okay, in a global perspective, did you get this question correct? No, you did not. Your balance sheet doesn't balance. But what they're going to do is they're going to look at each individual number on that balance sheet. And every number you have individually that's correct, you get points for that. So cash is right, inventory is right, receivables is right, fixed assets is right, payables is correct, common stock is correct, your APIC account is wrong. Okay, one number is wrong. It's very possible that you will get 9 out of 10 points for that balance sheet. You missed the point for whatever you missed, but all the rest of them are correct. If there's a series of steps in the process, calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So you calculate the cost of the common stock. You calculate the cost of the preferred stock. Okay, you calculate the cost of the debt. And then you do the weighted average calculation. Let's pretend you calculated the cost of the common stock incorrectly. You made a mistake. Well, if you made a mistake in the calculation of the common stock cost, your weighted average cost of capital is wrong because you have the wrong numbers going into your calculation. But what they do when they mark this question is they say, okay, sure, the cost of stock is wrong. Common stock, that's wrong. No points for that. Preferred stock is correct. The debt is correct. What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, let's pretend that what you wrote for the cost of common equity was correct. If that number was correct, did you calculate the weighted average cost of capital correctly? You only lose points once, or you don't get points once for a mistake. They won't mark off everything else because you made a mistake in step one. So all of this to say, they are trying to give you as many points as possible. They want you to pass. They want you to get as many points as you can. You need to do everything you can to help them give you points. Answer the question. Write something down. If it asks you to give 3 things they should do, make a bullet list and label them 1, 2, 3. Make it easy for them to see that you know what you're doing. Little formatting in your typing is good. Okay, help make it easy for them to give you the points that you've earned. Okay, that's what we need to do on the essays. Now, the last topic or the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the essays is how to study for the essays. This is a question we get a lot. How do I study for the essays? Well, here's the thing that you need to remember. Okay, and I show this. If I were to ask you, what topics are tested on the MCQs? What are the topics that are tested on the MCQs? You would tell me it's the learning outcome statements. Okay. The learning outcome statements are what are tested on the MCQs. And we go through and there's a bunch of topics there. And then I ask you, what topics are tested on the essays? It's the same learning outcome statements. It's the same syllabus, the same content, the same topics, the same calculations, the same definitions, the same everything is in the MCQs and in the essays. It's the same in the MCQs and the same in the essays. So here's the thing. Most of the essay questions could be made into multiple choice questions. More than one, but we would be able to take that essay question and most of them we could break down into multiple choice questions. Give you an example. In part 2, one of the types of questions they've asked in the past is about ratios. And they give you the company's financial information and they say, calculate these 6 ratios. Okay. Each one of those calculations, each one of those ratios that's in the essay could very easily be an MCQ. And the thing is, the formula to calculate the debt to equity ratio is the same if you're calculating an MCQ as it is if you're calculating an essay. Okay. The debt to equity ratio is the same, no matter how the question is formatted. And so the way you study for the essays is to study for the exam. Every time you do an MCQ, you are also preparing for the essays. Because that MCQ could be part of your essay. All of those ratios. You might be tested with 6 multiple choice questions about ratios. Or you get one of your essays that's about ratios and has you calculate 6 ratios as part of the essay. What's the difference? The only difference is that if it's an MCQ, you get to see whether or not the number you calculated is one of the 4 choices. You calculate, you do your math, and you get 3.1. And you can see whether or not 3.1 is one of the choices. If it is a choice, you're happy, you put it, you move on. If it's not one of the choices, you know you did something wrong. With an essay, you calculate 3.1 and you don't get any feedback because you don't have choices. You just have to put 3.1 as your answer. But the formula is the same way. The cost of debt is calculated the same way in an MCQ as it is in an essay. Overhead is allocated the same way in an MCQ as it is in an essay. The code of ethics is the same for an MCQ as it is for an essay. The content is the same for both MCQs and essays. So again, I'll say it again. How do you prepare for the essays? You prepare for the essays by preparing for the exam. As you are preparing for the exam, as you are preparing for the MCQs, you are also preparing for the essays. Now, there is something that you need to do specifically for the essays. What you need to do as a specific study item for the essays is to look at the essays and the problems that we have in the software. You want to see how these questions have been asked in the past. You want to get familiar with the way that they have multiple requirements and there's different things that you have to do. And it's not just one big essay with one big answer, but there's going to be 7 or 8 different requirements that you're going to have to do in each of those essays. So go through and do every one of the essays in the software. Good study tips, good study practice. Okay, because it's a bunch of ratios, it's the whole overhead allocation process, all put together into one scenario. Okay, so you want to do all of those. But other than that, I really don't think there's anything specific that you need to do to prepare for the essays other than preparing for the exam. And this goes back to what I said about the MCQs and the essays and your score being similar. If you, on your MCQs, had 6 MCQs about ratios, and you didn't know the formulas, you didn't know how to calculate the ratios for the MCQs, how are you going to calculate the ratios if they were in an essay question? If you don't know how to allocate overhead as an MCQ, how do you know how to allocate overhead as part of an essay? So your strategy for the essays is simply to be prepared for the exam as a whole. And if you are prepared for the exam as a whole, you're ready for the MCQs, you're ready for the essays, and you're going to pass. Okay? It's just a matter of being prepared and going through and learning and understanding the content. So what we've done, we've got one more topic that we're going to talk about here. We've talked about the MCQs, we've talked about the essays. The other thing that I want to talk about is the mock exams and the last few weeks of your study. Okay, let's pretend that your exam date is 4 weeks away, 6 weeks away, and you're almost done studying, you're in section F. What do you want to do? Well, we think that you need to have a few weeks at least to do a final review. Okay, you may have been studying for 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. However long you've been studying, you studied section A, topic 1, a long time ago. So you need to go back and refresh your memory. Okay, hopefully you've been doing some MCQs from section A after you finish section B, and you've been kind of doing some review MCQs. But these last few weeks, you need to make certain that you go back and refresh your memory, refresh your knowledge in all of these topics. And so one of the things is when to take the mock exams. We have 2 mock exams in our system. And what makes these mock exams different is that these are questions that you have not seen before. Okay, when you go through all the study units and you practice, and there's questions about overhead allocation, and there's questions about all the individual topics, you study those. That's what the review tests, the review sections are all based off of that database of questions. But these mock exams, these 2 mock exams, are completely new questions. And so these mock exams are going to be very, very good tools for you to assess how ready you are. We recommend that you take the first of these 2 mock exams 3 to 4 weeks before your actual exam date. Okay, 3 to 4 weeks. Now, if you have not studied seriously, you're not ready, okay? And you're not going to do well on the mock exam. I can tell you that right now. But if you've studied and you're a month away from your exam and you've studied, you've gone to class, you've watched the videos, you've done the MCQs, you've read the book, you've asked questions when you've had them, 3 to 4 weeks before your actual exam, take the first mock exam. And this means sit down for 3 hours with the MCQs and then an hour to do the essays. Make it one block of time. Okay, that's a long time to sit in the same chair. If you haven't done this before, you need to have that practice just of sitting in the chair. So 3 to 4 weeks before your actual exam, take the first mock exam. And chances are good that you're not going to like your score. You're going to think it should be higher. You wish it was going to be higher, whatever the case may be, but that's okay. You still have time. So based on that mock exam, you may identify some areas you need to study again. Oh, I really didn't feel comfortable at all in the questions about ratios or the questions about budgeting or whatever it is. So go back and do some more review. And then 1 to 2 weeks before your actual exam, take the second mock exam. Okay. You'll do a little bit better simply because you've gone through the process before and you've sat in the same chair for 3 hours and you've done all of that before. And so you'll do a little bit better simply because you have that experience. But in these last few weeks, I cannot tell you what topics you need to review. Sometimes people ask us, what topics should I study? What topics should I spend time on? It's up to you because you know what topics you don't feel comfortable with. You know what topics never really settled in with you. But at this point, you also don't need to focus on one question. Okay. Every topic on the exam, there are topics that I call details. If this and this happens, then you do this. There's those little, if we go through the learning outcome statements, there are some topics that have a lot of questions in the database, and there's some that just have 1 or 2. Don't focus on the detail topics. Focus on those topics that have lots of MCQs because that's been tested heavily in the past. Everything can be tested, but realistically, we know that budgeting is going to have a good number of questions about it. We know ratios is going to have a good number of questions about it based on the fact that that's a large part of that section. Okay, but don't focus on a one paragraph in the textbook that has 1 MCQ connected to it. If you understand it, that's great. But if you don't understand it, that's not where your focus needs to be. You need to be focusing on the topics that are larger, have more questions in the test bank, because that's where more likely where your questions are going to come. But it's just a matter of focusing on what you don't feel comfortable with. Do MCQs. If there's a video particularly you'd like to watch again, if there's a few pages in the textbook, I recommend that you flip through the textbook, just kind of scan it quickly. Also in our study system, the final review tool, in the final review study unit, we have what we call the LOS review, where we take the learning outcome statements and we have every learning outcome statement with a short answer to it. Okay. So that's a good way to go through and just make certain you've covered everything and what it is that you're doing in those final preparations that you have for the exam. And so I've talked a little bit about what it is that we need to study in the last few weeks. So this is essentially what I wanted to talk about, the things that I specifically wanted to share. And so what this brings us to is it brings us to our questions and answer section. And I can see that there are a lot of questions already in the Q&A that are available, and I'll start going through those. And I think Kurt will help me with some of those. Some of them may have already been answered. But as you're studying, if you have any questions, send us an email. If you have technical questions, put questions into our student forum. If you have a question about content or you're not certain about how to allocate overhead or whatever the case may be, put those questions into our student forum. You can also read through what's in the student forum. We have thousands of questions that people have asked in the past and our answers. And so it's very possible that there are questions that you have that you don't know that you have. You haven't thought of that question yet, or you haven't realized that that's a question yet. And so that's something that is available for you to read as well and to go through all of that. And so I will, Kurt, do you have any set of questions that you want me to start with, or how do you want me to go through all of this?
I've pulled a couple from the Q&A that people have answered.
Right.
I'm just going to throw a few of them out here that seem to be larger questions that everybody can benefit from. The first one was, as we study, how do we retain all the information from the various sections? As I tackle the topics, I feel overwhelmed. Well, part of that is reality. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is, unfortunately. But what we recommend, and this is built into our study system, is that when you finish section B, go back and do 20, 25 MCQs from section A. You don't have to restudy section A,
But by doing questions from section A, those topics stay in your mind. And when you get to section C and you're done with section C, do some questions from section B and some questions from section A. If you study properly, okay, and part of what I mean by properly is not while you're watching TV. Okay, if you're focused while you're studying and you're serious about your studies and you read the book and you watch the video and you do the MCQs and you ask questions, you actually know more than you think you do. What happens when you get to the end and you remember, oh, I don't remember this detail about section A. Okay, maybe you don't. But if you've laid a good foundation as you've been studying, it's there, you just don't actively remember it. And so that's what doing those questions, you finish section D, do a few questions from section C, section B, section A. That's what helps keep that section A knowledge in your mind. And so the message is, if you're studying properly, you actually know more than you think you do. And you just need to kind of refresh that as you get done to that final review stage.
Perfect. That goes into another question. Several people have mentioned that they have exams coming up in the February window for this. Some feel well prepared, some feel like circumstances have gotten in their way currently, and they're curious if they started in depth with their studying now, or started really intensely studying for it now. What's the likelihood of success in a short window?
Well, a lot of that depends on how much you've already done. One of the things to keep in mind is that if you are realistic about how long it will take to study, and by realistic, this is how we build our study system. We estimate how long each study unit should take to study based on how many pages are in the textbook, how many minutes of videos there are, and how many MCQs there are. So if you add all of that up, it comes out to about 200 hours per part is what you need to budget at the beginning to study. People wonder if there's a shortcut. Well, the only shortcut is if you already know something before you start studying. So if you've been doing budgeting your whole life, when you get to the budgeting section, it won't take you as long. You may not need to watch all of the videos. You may not need to read the book. You just need to do the questions to make certain you know it for CMA. But if you have in mind 200 hours is what it's going to take to study, and you have not started studying yet, okay, February is not realistic, because to get 200 hours in the next 7 weeks is 30 hours a week for 7 weeks in a row. Not realistic, especially if you have a job, family, friends, anything like that. If you've already been studying and you got all the way through section C and you kind of stopped and it's been a month, maybe. But what you need to do is you need to be very honest with yourself about how much you can study and will study in the next 6 weeks. And I know it's very easy to sit here and say, oh, it's the beginning of the year. I'm excited. This is my resolution. I'm going to come home from work and I'm going to study 5 hours every night. That's a great plan and it's a great target. But realistically, I don't think that's sustainable in the long term. So it's a matter of being very realistic about how much time it is that you will be able to study. Okay. I wrote the book. I made the videos. It's not that exciting. You can't do it for 5 hours every night after you come home from work. Now, you might be able to do it for a few days before your exam. You're really motivated. The exam is coming. But to say you're going to do that for 7 weeks, I don't think is realistic. And so it's a matter of being honest with yourself about how much time you actually can study and whether or not that is enough time to do everything you need to do.
Right, to be successful.
If you have not started yet studying, February is not your target date. If you've studied and you've been doing some of it and you just need to get back to it, then yeah, that's very possible that February is a realistic thing.
Great. A couple folks had asked exam specific questions, more not necessarily about the content, but more so about how the exam itself goes. One question regarded, will the MCQs all be given at the same time so you can actually go through them
Yeah.
and see which ones you understand? That I assume that answer is
Yeah,
yes.
you can read them all without answering any of them if you wanted to. I don't recommend that, but you have all 100 are right there, and you can jump around if you want to. They're all there
So
at the beginning.
you can scroll through, you can answer the ones
Yep.
as you read through them that you know, and then go back and
Yeah.
spend that extra time on the other parts. Excellent.
Yep.
Is there a minimum number of MCQs required to be correct to unlock the essay portion?
Yep. 50%.
50% is that
If you don't
threshold.
get 50% on the MCQs, you don't get the essays.
Fair enough. And
Yep.
the other one that folks asked about was regarding the essays. Is longer better than shorter? If you write more than 3 points that they ask for, is that beneficial? I guess my assumption would be if you're answering it thoroughly and completely, length is less
Yeah,
relevant to the
it's
content.
if they ask for three things and you give four, you're only going to get 3 points.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of, to some extent, I would almost say length is a problem because you have a certain amount of time. And if you spend all of your time trying to write a very perfect, detailed answer to the first requirement, you don't have time to do the last requirement. And so you want to answer it, but then you want to be done. Answer the question. There's no bonus points for talking about things that aren't in the question. There's no bonus points for adding other stuff that's not relevant.
Great. Is there benefit to doing testing virtually versus at a center?
CMA is only available at a testing center. You have to
Okay.
go to Prometric. There is
Okay.
no, there was a brief period of time that there was remote proctoring, but for CMA now you have to go to a Prometric center.
That is a physical in-person thing then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. That is,
Well, I've been scrolling through here. I've seen a few people have asked about the percentage sections.
right.
That's what's on on the syllabus. Section A is, I don't remember right off the top of my head, but in the syllabus, they say a specific percent. And something to keep in mind about that. Let's pretend that there's a section that's 20%. That doesn't mean you're going to get 20 MCQs about it. It's possible that you get 24 MCQs or 16 MCQs because that 20% is 20% of the exam, which means that it includes the essay. So if you have no essay questions about that section, you will have more than 20 MCQs. If part of the essay is about that section, then you will have less than 20 MCQs so that the weight is the same over the whole exam. I know sometimes we get comments from people, they say, oh, I had so many questions about this section and I had no questions about this section. Probably not the case. You remember it because you weren't prepared or they were difficult or something like that. But you can come out of the exam comfortable that overall, counting the MCQs and the essays, that you were close, they were the percent weight that they were supposed to be on the exam. A couple people asked about negative marking for the essays. I don't think that's what it is. I think this is positive marking. You start with 0 and you get points for everything that you wrote that is correct. A couple people asked about taking both parts in the same exam window. You can. I don't know that you need to. The only time, the main reason I would suggest that you would want to take both parts at the same time is if you have to travel to your exam site. If you have to fly to take your exam, simply the cost of flying again to take the exam may be prohibitive. And so in that case, you may want to take both parts at the same time. But if you're you're walking to your exam center to take the exam, I would take part 1, study, and then take part 2 when you're ready for that. There's no need to take both exams in the same time. There's a question about the pass mark. The passing score is 360 out of 500. A lot of times people say, oh, well, that's 72%. And yeah, 360 is 72% of 500. That is correct. But the way that the score is given, and we have something on our website, a very detailed explanation of this. It's what is called a scaled score. And so what that means is that your passing score is based a little bit on the difficulty level of the MCQs that you got. So, for example, you know that if you sit down and study and you say, give me 20 questions, and then you do another 20 questions, the difficulty of those 20 questions are different. Some had a little more easy, some were a little more difficult. So when your 100 MCQs are pulled out of the database of questions at the test center, there's a difficulty level associated with your exam. If you were unlucky and you got more difficult questions and fewer easier questions, it means that maybe if you get 2 fewer questions correct, you'll still pass. Okay. And so this means there's a little bit of not necessarily a curve in the traditional sense, but your score is adjusted based on how difficult your individual exam was. This is what I tell people. You need to target getting 75% of the MCQs correct and getting 75% of the essay points. If you get 75% of the MCQs correct and 75% of the essay points, you will pass your exam. 74 and 74, most likely. 73 and 73, probably. The further below 75 you go, the more you're dependent on your exam being determined to have been a difficult exam. So the best strategy, get 75% of the MCQs correct and get 75% of the essay points. You pass, full stop, no questions asked. Okay, so have that as your guide. Kind of scrolling quickly through the points. A lot of questions about the scale. The question, do you need to know Excel for the exam? No. You're not given Excel. You may be given a very basic spreadsheet. But even that it's not a spreadsheet exam. There's a question about how much time to study per day. How many days until you take the exam? It's 200 hours. If you want to take the exam in January, a year from now, well, 30 minutes a day ought to do it. If you want to take the exam in May, in 5 months, then you need to do it. Within our study system, if you put in your exam date, it will tell you how many hours a week you need to study to be ready for that exam date. And that just allows you to say, okay, it tells me I need to study 28 hours a week. I'm able to study 7 hours a week. I'm not going to be ready for my exam. So just a very simple assessment as to how close, how much time and when you would be ready to take the exam.
With regard to exam testing, paper provided, can you take it in? Can you take calculators?
You either get paper or you get a whiteboard, a little whiteboard to write on. The last exam I took for IMA, I was given paper. Okay. Paper and pencil is what I was given.
Okay. Question about studying individually or in groups. I'm assuming that's individual preference, but I've always
found if you're studying with a live taught provider, that's your group, that's your kind of pacing to go through all of the content. If you're studying by yourself and you have friends or colleagues, people that are studying with you, it is a good form of peer pressure. It also helps you feel a little bit less like you are alone in this. And so if there's other people that you have that you can study with, there is a question, should you start with part 1 or part 2? The answer to that is yes, you should start with part 1 or part 2. Those are the only choices. It doesn't matter. The 2 parts don't build on each other. It's not like there's information in part 1 that you need to know for part 2. What I tell people or the way I present it is, if you look at the syllabus and one of the parts is easier for you, start with that part. So basically, if you like financial accounting, then start with part 1. If you like corporate finance, start with part 2. But if you look at them and they're completely the same, it doesn't matter to you. Also, I've kind of mentioned this, and I'll mention this a little more formally. There are a lot of training companies that are very, very good training companies that work with us, use our materials in their classes. And so at the bottom, if you're looking for somebody to a training company where you are to study with them instead of to do self-study, if you go to our website and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a link that says, I'm sorry, I need to stop sharing. There's a link that says live providers or something like that. You can click on that link, and I think it just got put into the chat. That will help you find the companies that we work with who use our materials in their classes. And so that would be a great resource for you if you're looking for a live training provider to work with. That would be a great tool for that, or a great list of those providers. There's some questions that are very specific that I'm not going to address here because it goes into a very specific thing. I think I know that our time is up and we're getting close to to the end, and I've kind of done a lot of the questions I think that we've talked about. If you have any questions, please reach out to us by email. You can reach us at support at hockinternational.com. We're happy to answer whatever questions you have. If we didn't have a chance to answer the question now, we will get this posted, this video, the recording of this, if you want to watch it again, if you weren't here, and you're obviously not hearing me say this, but we'll get this link out to you so that you can watch this exam. I'll just conclude by saying to everyone, Happy New Year. This is, we're at the start of the year, and I know a lot of people have their exam coming up in the next couple of months. I wish all of you tremendous success on your exam. I hope all of the questions are easy for you. I hope that you don't have any long questions that you need to mark and come back to at the end. I hope that as you go through the first time, they're all easy for you. As you're studying with us, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and ask your questions. We're here to help. We're here to answer those questions. Better that you ask the question now before your exam rather than sitting at your exam and thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked that question. So please ask questions. Let us know how we can help. Have a great start to the year. Great success on your exams. It was a pleasure. Thank all of you for coming. I hope that you learned a little something. I hope you're a little less anxious about going into your exam coming up here in the next few weeks. So thank you very much, and I wish you all great success on your exams.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. We appreciate your time.
Thanks.